All right, so for those of you who've just joined us, welcome to the session on building inclusive digital cities. We're going to be focusing on the risks, challenges, and solutions around data-driven public-private partnerships in this context. So we've got two parts to the session today. The first part is more theory-based. We'll just give a brief introduction of ourselves and our institutions. We'll then give some idea of what a data-driven PPP is, and then we will also look at, Johannes will give us a breakdown of what his work on smart cities, and then we'll look at exploring challenges and solutions within this context. The second part will be active discussion amongst the participants, where you'll be asked to brainstorm some ideas there. The main aim of this session is to build an understanding of the core challenges around these types of partnerships, and also apply it specifically to the smart city context, and then explore the possible solutions to these core challenges. So a brief introduction of ourselves. My name is Joanna van der Merwe. I am the Privacy and Protection Lead at the Center for Innovation at Leiden University. We are a think and do tank that focuses on data and tech for education and social impact. Johannes?
Yes, thanks a lot, Joanna, and welcome on my behalf as well. My name is Johannes Mikkonen. I suppose you have had a long day already, and but hope you have enjoyed the session and you have some energy left for discussing today about the urgent and important matters of data-driven partnerships. I'm working in a think tank called Demos Helsinki. We are a Helsinki-based independent think tank, and then where we fight together for fair and sustainable, joyful next era. My work is especially focusing on to imagining and building better public governance and enhancing governance innovation. And then where the data issues, of course, play a major role. And that's why I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity to be here today to discuss with you about the fair data usage in digital cities.
And hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Wood. I have been working with Joanna at the Center for Innovation particularly on this project that we're going to present to you in the next couple of minutes, and also research associated with data-driven public-private partnerships. And I'm really looking forward to getting to discuss some of your ideas today and helping introduce this topic to more people. And I think we're going to go ahead with Joanna starting to introduce data-driven public-private partnerships.
So I'd like to introduce what the Center's exploration of this new type of partnership. I think public-private partnerships are something that are quite well known. It's a common way of governments of getting a lot of infrastructure built. It's quite common, but what we're seeing now is that there is a new dynamic coming about in these public-private partnerships, specifically when they're data-driven. And what we mean by a data-driven public-private partnership is one where a private actor provides a product or a service addressing a specific public sector challenge. And this product or service tends to be customized specifically for the public sector actor and for that challenge. And they are heavily reliant on significant amounts of data. And this includes personal data, demographic data, and sensitive data, which these public sector actors tend to have the legitimate interest to collect in order to provide services, but need assistance in actually using and optimizing. And so there is active engagement in these ones from both parties throughout the partnership as they build this bespoke solution. And what is in all public-private partnerships, there is an element of risk sharing, but with there's a new dynamic to this risk and new types of risk that are emerging. And within that, a power imbalance, which Hannah will talk about in a bit. Some examples of these public-private partnerships that we're talking about are, for instance, MasterCard's partnerships with World Food Programme for cash-based assistance. You're seeing Amazon partnering with the National Health Service in the UK. And I think one of the most infamous ones is Palantir Technologies and the ICE program in the US, where they're helping with what has now become deportations. But these are, and you're seeing a new type of risk emerging from these partnerships, which did not exist before, at least not to this extent. And also, there's the existing solution frameworks are not applicable to the new types of challenges and risks that are emerging. And I think Hannah will talk a bit about what we at the center have researched on these risks.
Yeah, thank you, Joey, for that. So I'll just go straight into the overall concept of one of the largest risks that we have really found that happens in these partnerships is that there's this overarching power imbalance between the private and public sector. And why does that power imbalance occur? First, it's because the public sector is significantly dependent on the private sector for these certain functions that they need to take on, as all public sector entities have to deal with more and more data for all of their civilians. So, for example, in 2014, the CIA had to contract Amazon Web Services for $600 million to host most of their information on the Amazon Web Services platform. Now, this in particular instance meant that the Central Intelligence Agency was particularly dependent on a single private sector actor who was in charge of a large amount of their data. And although in 2019, it became that they realized that they needed to diversify their platform, so they opened up a contract for $10 million to try to see if other service providers could start to provide similar services for them. Already, this was an issue that CIA had been dependent on one single partner. And not only is the public sector dependent on a single partner, but the public sector in particular has to serve civilians. So if we can just go to the next point. So the civilians are the ones that are dependent on the public sector, where the public sector is beholden to its stakeholders. So the private sector main goal is to make as much money as possible, whereas in the public sector, they have to serve individual and civilians. For example, in 2016, the United Kingdom partnered with NHS, the NHS partnered with Alphabet's DeepMind to work on providing a function to help diagnose kidney malfunctioning through an online service. However, this also meant that NHS was providing Google's Alphabet's DeepMind with 1.6 million points of data that was from unanonymized users. So already these civilians that were dependent on NHS for a service within the health sector, immediately their data was transferred to the private sector partner without the proper discussions. And finally, the largest issue is that the public sector doesn't really have a lot of incentive to investigate these risks. The public sector needs these functionalities. The public sector wants to serve its civilians as best as it can. So ultimately, they're heavily reliant, and there's this power imbalance between the two actors where oftentimes this data can be used by private sectors in unknown ways, potentially even if it's just to develop their own algorithms within that private sector partner, or in unknown ways that are non-transparent. And Johannes is going to go and take us into a really important case study with smart cities, talking about how these issues are brought about in real life situations.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Thanks a lot, Anna, and thanks a lot, Joanna. And in a case somebody joined us later and didn't hear introduction, my name is Johannes Mikkonen from a think tank called Demos Helsinki, where I work with governance innovation, and I will talk a little bit about the governance today in the context of smart city, based on our experiences working with the public sector. So I think Joanna and Hannah put very kind of comprehensive view on challenges and risks that the data-driven partnerships currently have. And I would like you to keep those in mind, but now look for look at the fair data usage with a bit different perspective and in the context of development of smart cities. So please go to the next slide. So as we all know, smart cities and generally like using digital technologies have a quite big promise for us. And we need to develop smarter cities in order to cut our greenhouse gas emissions, and also build cities that are convenient for us, for people who are living in the cities. And of course, like opportunities of using data via new technologies are increasing for these purposes. The important question always when we are doing the smart city development project is the question like what kind of cities we are developing when we are digitalizing our cities. Are they something that we would be happy and proud to call as home, and is there like space for coincidences or joy? So in a way, like often the images of smart cities are referring to the kind of like Silicon Valley images, but why not instead to have a kind of like images and imaginations of for example, Moomin Valley or some other place where we would like everyone could be able to feel home and convenient. Please go the next slide, which like however, like often we see that kind of like current development of smart cities and especially utilizing data there is done in appropriate ways. We have read the several cases where for example, COVID-19 tracking applications have been suspected to be used for purposes that they were not meant for example, to identifying demonstrators and so on. And there's this case example in the slide, which we were able to read in May that in turn the quasi smart city development project, the Google affiliate Sidewalk Labs was strongly criticized for data protection and privacy, and also like including other problems related to taxations and issues contrasting with democratic decision making. And these are kind of like this is the example of the problems when we develop smart city project, when we digitalize our cities in a way that one single entity or one private company is able to dictate how the data is collected, how the data is used, and for what kind of purposes. And then the question is, of course, like what can we learn from these bad examples in a way? If you go to this next slide, like I have the slogan that's borrowed from Bill Clinton presidential campaign, where he told that it's the economy stupid. But I would claim that it's like the smart city development is not about technologies. It won't save us. It's about governance. It's not about the smart city models either or privacy of individual technologies. But it's about the governance system that is capable of developing technologies and human rights in harmony. Of course, I don't mean to say that the technologies are irrelevant or useless or anything like that. On the contrary, as said, technologies and digitalization generally offer a huge promise and possibilities for the whole of society, and especially for densely populated cities. But the actual problem is how to be able to take full advantage of these technologies, how to actually put their potential in use. And currently we are not doing that. And I claim that that's because of the challenges in government. And in order to do that, we shouldn't be discussing solely about technologies themselves or smart city models, but the governance principles and visions, values that are able to develop both technologies and human rights in harmony. And we need to kind of like shift focus, put the people in at the core and focus on people's need, and then develop models and tech to be served those. So this is generally like how we see it. The technology and smart city models are important, yes, but they are built on a foundation of governance, which is a way we need. Which is why we need to first have an understanding of how the governance works, what are the characteristics of it, and then discuss only the models and technologies themselves. There are a couple of the inspiring cases where especially like inspiration that way, that how the data has been used for like empowering people to give kind of like action, the people to opportunity to act, to have an impact, how their data is collected and used. One is if you go, one is like from India, I Paid Pride called websites, which crowdsources reports of retail corruption and bribery. And in these websites, citizens are able to report like why they paid a bribe, to whom, and when they paid it. And then it forms the scores and rankings of different cities in India based on those reports. Another inspirational example comes from UK, from Bristol. It's called citizen sensing. And as we know, when we are developing our cities in a way smarter, it means often that it means more digital sensors are appearing everywhere, like in the lamp post, on buses, on our phones, litter bins, you name it. And then those sensors are detecting and collecting information about us and our environment, such as motion, temperature, light and noise, and so on. But often, like, we don't know about the information these sensors are collecting and who is using it and for what purposes. And in Bristol, they involved individuals and communities in the city to be part of designing and building their own digital sensors, making kind of like that kind of like mysterious smart technologies to have a clear purpose and help the community and the city to make sense of the individuals make sense of the city, and then take steps to change it for the better. This was just like, that's a very brief presentation and couple of the examples. I hope this kind of like give you some kind of like thoughts for discussion, and then when, like, especially when we are going next to discuss more about what different kind of solutions that could enable building inclusive digital cities and data-driven partnerships that are enabling that. Next, I would like to ask Hanna maybe to have a stage and briefly summarize the key points from these two introductions to our discussion.
Yeah, great. I mean, it's been really exciting to be able to work both with the Center for Innovation and with Demos Helsinki, because we've found some really important commonalities in the risks that have been associated with the overarching concept of data-driven public-private partnerships and also smart cities. And in particular, some of the risks that we've found together are these four ideas of needing more transparency, needing to focus more on human-centered design, coming to consistent agreements, and then ensuring responsibility on both the human side and the private sector side of a partnership. So just like to go into a couple of the risks that we have considered, and then after that, hopefully this gets the juices flowing for the conversation that we're going to have afterwards individually with you on the Miro boards. But in terms of transparency, as we mentioned before, there's an inherent lack of transparency of the products that are being developed. For example, we don't know how these algorithms are being developed. Obviously, there's this really broad concept of a black box algorithm, yet it's so important for us to understand how algorithms are being developed for products that are serving either humans in smart cities or any type of civilian that the public sector is serving as well. And especially in terms of Johannes's work, we have looked at human-centric design. So how do we keep the public informed that these issues exist at all? How do we create a structure for citizens to input and participate in the experience? It's all a lot about figuring out how to create a structure to address these risks. That's been really important. And in terms of agreements, how do we make sure that both private sector partners and public sector partners have the same goals and ethical considerations? Because we want to make sure that the private sector is also incentivized to help minority groups if data is being shared from these minority groups that could potentially put them in harm's way. And then ultimately, just in terms of the technical data responsibility, making sure that any data being created is done in a very thoughtful and responsible manner. So these are the broad risks that we've considered. And we're going to go into sort of talking you through how we're going to go through our breakout rooms and discussions so that we can come up with more ideas of risks that these types of partnerships and situations put us in, and hopefully get to some innovative solutions.
So I'm going to take us into how we're going to put this into a workshop format. There'll be one of us in each of the workshop groups, in the breakout groups. So if you have any questions about anything we've discussed before this, feel free to just ask in the group, and we'll be happy to go into more detail if needed to spark some more inspiration or clarify some points. So the breakout groups will be about 15 minutes of brainstorming. And so you'll be asked to identify challenges and risks, and then you'll be asked to select one of these challenges or risks as the main one that you're going to focus on, and then generate some solutions that you have for that risk. And we're going to come back after 15 minutes to this main room and ask one person from each of the groups to then present the findings of their group. All right. Okay. So group one chose me to present their findings. I'm going to ask them to maybe elaborate on some of the stuff. So this is just a quick view of some of the challenges that we came up with. I think we went very quickly through challenges and went straight onto trying to find one and then look at solutions. So transparency was a big one. Understanding the solutions available and their value was another one. Different agendas, different languages between those programs, and this is the one we chose really, was the different agendas and different languages that people speak around these issues. And so that really can really relates to the main challenges is how are we training the algorithms? How are we doing this? How are we labeling data? How are we saying what matters and what doesn't? And there's really a disconnect between those that are training and developing the algorithms in these private sector companies and those that are implementing them and this at the city level and those that have to then use them. And this disconnect is really related to this language, culture, understanding of what matters and what's important. And so it's not a binary. There's a scale of things that have to be understood, and that really affects how you train these algorithms. And so some of the solutions that we came up with as a group were there needs to be an agreement on what the common goal is that is being achieved. I think, as Hannah pointed out in the earlier presentation, very often for private sector actors, the goal is profit, and that sometimes is legally obligated for them. Whereas public sector actors, it should be really public good for as many people as possible, preferably everybody. So some of the solutions, there is agreement on those goals and how to adapt to those, sharing terminology to overcome some of those barriers, a shared standardization on how you measure what the impact is on life, on an individual's life. How do you measure that, whether that impact is positive or negative? And then also at the city level, we discussed whether there should be an oath, for instance, as Kathy O'Neill, the author of Weapons of Math Destruction, tweeted the other day that maybe there should be an oath for data scientists to take the same way lawyers do, the same way doctors do. And we discussed that and thought maybe that's better at the city level, that there should be ethical standards that they have to uphold at the city governance level. And that even if you have these oaths, it needs to be concrete. It needs to be understood what comes behind that oath and how it's enforceable and how you can actually implement what you say you're going to do in the oath. And then also a really interesting one, and we've got a few, so I really want to not take too much time and focus on the one that I found the most interesting, was Sterling in our group really recommended an index for rating cities, but on how ethical they are or how inclusive they are. And then also rating the partners that these cities have engaged with to become inclusive and rating them on that, and that also leads to a solution on transparency, and kind of allows us to evaluate which cities are doing well and which ones are not, and can really fill that gap. I don't know if I've missed anything from our group, if they just want to take a couple seconds for anything that they think was important that I may have missed. Yeah, good. Okay.
Very good.
Right. I'm going to switch now to Hannah. You were group 2, if I'm correct.
So we were group 2. I think Johannes is going to probably introduce the challenges, and then we can have Aline explain her challenge that we chose after, and then I'll go into the solutions. And then we can clarify a bit of that at the end.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot. I see both groups were quite effective and productive during this short time, but I'm not really we were able to define quite a big broad of different kind of challenges. Many of them were related to the especially to these kind of partnerships and then how the tensions between the public sector and private sector, such as public sector is dependent not only private sector generally, but especially the challenges that they are dependent on big companies. When creating smart cities, and then they often the small and more agile companies or startups or innovations are not being able to participate in those procurement systems and so on. Then there were the lock-ins into a specific provider, and then the kind of a platformization of which is deep in urban context, underlying the same type of challenges, undermining the sovereignty of municipalities. Then there was the kind of more related to the citizen engagement and citizens, how we discussed how the smart city development is often focused on providing something nice to have things in our cities, but not especially tackling into the kind of a real social challenges. How the citizens don't have there is loss of autonomy. They are not capable to impact on the following predictive policies. And then was there something? And then there was that related to more generally maybe to the tech development, how there's bias from individual tech implement and different life cycle of software versus hardware, which is then the challenging the idle utilization of the technologies. We, as you can see, we did heavy voting, very democratic voting, except we were a little bit messing up with those marks, but yeah, and in the end we chose to focus more on this challenge of loss of autonomy of citizens following predicting policies. Maybe I could ask Alina to explain it very briefly to the others. I think it's very important topic. We can't hear you, Alina. I think you're muted now.
Sorry, classical. So this is a question about how do we see then the autonomy or agency of citizens when we offer predictive policing to their favor. So already during this conference, I've heard many presentations where it's viewed as a positive thing that municipalities can predict needs, for example, for healthcare or social services of their citizens. But is the downside of it that in certain contexts, it means that citizens are not provided with all the options that they have and they're nudged to a certain direction? So that was the topic.
Thank you for explaining that, Alina. I think it's a really interesting point, and it led to some really interesting brainstorming. And I'd say there's a lot of sticky notes here, but sort of combined into 4 different things that I was reviewing, and anybody feel free to chime in at any point if there's something that I'm missing that you mentioned. But the 4 things that I seem to notice brought up first is figuring out where is predictive policy making allowed. Can you have it in democratic societies? In what type of government area should you be allowed to have these predictive policies created? And second, maybe we could have users opt into these policies and create a way for them to opt in or opt out. Third is figuring out how to educate the population so that people understand that these policies aren't being made with large amounts of user data in order to change their behavior, and fundamentally educating people from a very young age so that they can learn how their behavior is being manipulated potentially. And then ultimately that gets to our fourth idea, that can we come up with a remedy to these behavioral shifts? So if a policy is created that does change your behavior in a way that you didn't expect, or ultimately is damaging, maybe it convinces you to go into a certain form of housing. Maybe be an interesting thing for Bill to explore is if people are nudged into choosing a form of low-income housing, and that was a behavior made by, or something that you were convinced to do through a policy that was created. How do you create a remedy if something goes wrong with that? And I think there's 2 points that I would love to hear whoever talked about it. First, the first idea of where's predictive policing accepted? Who's the one who talked about that?
It was me.
That was you.
So I thought that maybe there's some areas where we shouldn't have that. So if it's, for example, a portal where you voice opinions about certain, I don't know, decision making in the city, maybe there you should be very cautious of nudging anyone towards any direction, because this is really exercise of autonomy. But maybe, I don't know, if it's a translation services on a website which is predictive, I don't think anyone is that damaged by that.
Right. Do you think that there are areas that people could maybe contribute to choosing which type of policies or might be good and bad? Have you thought about any potential ways for people to contribute to that decision-making process?
No, I was more thinking of, if, for example, certain predictive solutions are used on municipality web pages, that they wouldn't be used for, I don't know, voicing an opinion on certain matter. It wasn't more sophisticated than that.
Thank you very much. And somebody wrote something about a remedy, potentially. Who was that?
It was me again.
That was you. No, it's great. This is wonderful.
But there was also somebody else writing ability to contest decisions. It's essentially the same thing. So maybe they can have the floor.
Yeah, that's a good idea. No one dares to admit.
I think there could be an interesting space here for a discussion from our group. I think our group came from a very different angle in terms of, so we had more of a disabilities and health issues angle. I don't know, Sterling, if you want to engage with some of the things that you're seeing here to see if anything of this related to us. We do have a bit more time than I expected right now. So I think it would be interesting, because we're such a small group, to see how we engage with this, because I think we took a very specific group angle to ours. I can't see anybody. Any comments? Anybody want to engage?
I'll say something. I think part of the problem is that people have such a different life experience. The needs that they have are very different. The medical needs, the education needs, and really what we're all trying to do here is figure out how we can improve the quality of life of people, and try to do that through the city infrastructure, make it more inclusive and accessible. And there was a great talk yesterday where they said one of the main qualities or rights to people should be the right not to be forgotten. And so that's really a good basis to start with on what is the standardization of ethics? Because once you start on the standardization of ethics, then you can start on the standardization of terminology. And then from there, you start on the standardization of algorithms. And then you start on the standardization of how entities are held accountable for implementing the algorithms. Because you can still have an ethical algorithm and it be implemented unethically. So there has to be the checks and balances through the full system. And I would almost call it like a full stack inclusivity solution, because it's not just one thing and there's not just going to be one solution. And just like how we solve technical problems with a full stack, this needs to be a full stack collaboration solution.
Yeah, and that relates really well to somebody I saw in the chat as I just quickly opened it, about education. And I think on both sides, on our board, we also had an education element. And I see that you've also got an education element in yours. And it's just something that I see coming up multiple times. So wherever I present in whatever sector is that education. And I think what I found interesting is that, again, a completely different context, talking about city government, and once again, education's come up. And what I find really interesting about, Sterling, your approach to this is that if you take the focus off of the tech and also just put it back onto the people, it's how do we as a city become aware of what other citizens in the city are experiencing? Because I think the tech that we're seeing is so focused on personalization that you're forgetting that it's not just about you and how you want to experience it, but it's also, and I think that is a very interesting non-tech, non-ethics, non-standardization angle that is I think quite key. And I'm going to be honest, after 2 years of presenting on public-private partnerships, Sterling, yours is really, you've put it very succinctly, and I think it's applied to both here very well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I'm always learning from everyone. I'm happy to be here and learn from all of you. And I think I've traveled the world, and everyone lives differently and has different goals. And so the problem with cities is the same. Everyone has different goals on how they would do it, but everyone wants a good quality of life.
Yeah.
And we can figure out how to help those marginalized communities or the people make sure they're not left behind.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is also some interesting conversations going on in the chat. But I see that we've got about 15 minutes left. Hannah, would you like to continue with some of the discussion, or?
I think those were probably the main 4 points that I drew out of the solutions. I think Sterling, you really put it succinctly. I thought it was interesting of creating this standardization process. Something that I am curious about, do you think that it's useful, where would you hypothesize people coming together to discuss this standardization process of creating ethical solutions across? Would it be in sort of a United Nations function? Would it be a conference like this? Would it be, in educational institutes, or would it have to be directly with private sector partners who are, across the board coming up with their own ethical decisions?
Well, I think the specialists have to come up with the standards, and then those standards are communicated to the other categories of specialists. So that's why I'm here, is because these are the specialists about the technology, privacy, and ethical concerns from the technologist perspective. So the cities have to get together, as they do, and all the cities know each other. They talk together, they figure out what's working for one another. So the cities working with specialists on creating a standardization that they all can agree on, that they're held to. And then the same thing with the discussions with the collaborators or the partners in the cities. If they're presenting solutions to cities, these are the standards that they're held up to, and then it's agreed upon. And then those standards are shared between the different categories of people. So the technologists share with the cities share the standards with the technologists, and then it integrates that the full stack, or the spinal cord, if you will, about how it's really going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It kind of reminds me a bit of what was created, right? The Talon manual that was created a while ago, creating those ethical standards for cybersecurity practices. But now that was sort of on a very technical scale, and this is moving towards the social expectations to be used across the board. And it would be really interesting to see how people would bring a group of thinkers together, and ethicists, I suppose, to come up with these standards so that all cities can have sort of their own ethical Talon manual for creating these partnerships.
Well, and it's also easier said than done, right? Because people look at the cultural differences, languages differences. Joanna made really great points about that, and you think about artificial intelligence in certain countries. like cities in China or in Japan, it's not considered unethical for them and how they're working. In some other countries consider them unethical. And so that's one of the biggest discussions here, is that you have to get everybody in the same room and have the discussion. And you can't, when you create standardizations, you have to remember too that they're not applicable to everybody. That's why self-improvement apps are usually built that come out of Silicon Valley are usually built for white, wealthy people from Silicon Valley. So you have to allow it be flexible enough to be adaptable. That's a big problem.
Yeah, I see Heidi in the chat has mentioned a very good phrase, is cultural literacy as well, which is, yeah, you're seeing data literacy, cultural literacy. And so that's a good concept to be added to what we need to build in, maybe also to the tech sector.
Johannes, it might be interesting if you had any questions sort of about this. I think we're talking a lot about an ethical, like a group of experts, but then also maybe if you or other people have ideas about how to bring citizens and people into this conversation as well. So you really understand democratically, if you happen to be in a democratic society, yes, cultural things are not the same everywhere, but I guess hopefully, I think in a lot of situations, we're talking about democratic societies, maybe yes, maybe no, but if you had any ideas about how to bring people into this conversation.
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe before going there, I'd like to highlight a kind of like another perspective, or maybe even it's a bit challenging of this kind of like a discussion of implementing the ethical principles, which is of course like a very, very important. And then as discussed, they have to be we have to be those cannot be created in a way like out of the context or out of the cultural context or the kind of like implementation context. But for example, like I would like to praise the My Data principles, which the like global My Data community has been producing, which are like very good and ambitious goal how to give empowerment for people to not only to decide and not only to get access how their data is used, and for but also kind of like have an impact in which purposes they are used. We worked with the city of Helsinki a couple of years ago with their digitalization strategy, and they were very eager in a way to let's put these principles as a like guiding principles towards when we are digitally setting our services, and that's actually we need lots of like standardization. We need lots of discussion because it's very difficult. Like people. We like to use digital services that are convenient to use and which are nice to have, and that of course require lots of like collected data from different sources to make to talk with each other and to create like solutions that could be predictive or to kind of like solve the everyday problems of our lives. But the private companies or especially big platform companies are so much better in doing that because they have they don't have to follow those principles. So in the end that's kind of like a crucial problem, like how to increase public sector, like which have like a wider responsibility to take care of the like ethical issues and generally like to serve not only on short-term individual needs, but also as the whole society. And then there's a clear tension or contradiction between that and then creating like convenient digital solutions. And that's I don't have ideas like how to solve this, but it's something that's very urgent to discuss about.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a chicken and the egg problem because, I mean, I feel like citizens, I mean, if they're presented with just abstract ethical principles, it's very difficult to make a connection on what does it mean in my everyday life when I don't know, apply for housing, for example. But then in order to identify how how could their life be impacted with this innovations? For example, municipalities seeking to find out their opinions or about their needs will need to present the citizens with, I don't know, questions about possible innovative technologies they're not so aware of, but the market is. And kind of how to create that kind of feedback loop on what's ethical and what's accepted by the citizens. I don't have a solution to that.
So I have an interesting point on this, and I think, Alina, you make a great point on that. When you actually go back and look at people who tried to quantify the human experience, and you look at people like Maslow, which there's a lot of debate about Maslow, or you look at, there were even other type of structures, like Lawler proposed a 2-way structure, Porter had a 6-way structure, and Huizinga had a 7-way structure. And so what has to happen is in order to figure out how you're helping people, there needs to be almost like a base metric that we all understand is not universal, but on what is the quality of life. And you think about it, like people have physiological needs, right? They have safety needs, they have social needs, accomplishments, and that's the basis of what people need. And if you approach that from a city's perspective and say, are people fed? They have food, shelter, clothing, and up to a certain quality that the city wants to provide, right? What is the quality of that in our city, of the citizens? What is the quality of the education, right? And what is the quality? You look at the happiness index that people have for countries. It would be very easy to start an index of the same sort for inclusivity, and start having that as an index that cities then say, well, how can I work on this index because I want to be ranked higher globally? Then they can start bringing in the collaboration professionals, and that's when the discussions start happening about the standardizations and the adaptability.
So I think we're just gonna, thank you, Stone. We had a similar discussion in our group, and I think it's been a very fruitful kind of breakout groups and discussion, especially for those of us either who are doing this quite late at night. I know our room assistant is doing this in the middle of the night, so thanks to him. And then, so I'd just like to round off a little bit and let you. So I've put our contact details up here. Feel free to contact any of us. And just to round off on where this is going to go, what the information that was shared in the chat, there was quite active idea sharing in the chat, so that was also really nice. At least from the Center for Innovation, we are currently working on a project on public-private partnerships and how to build a framework or build a way that they can be more responsible, and what does that look like, and really sitting down and exploring, when people say they want transparency of the partnerships, what does that actually mean? What does transparency actually look like? We've had an interesting discussion about the fact that if you make things open source, it can be used for harm. And how do you grapple with those, and how do you make them ethical? So a lot of the discussion that we've had today will be fed into that research, and will provide the foundation of ideas that we start exploring further. If you'd like to be kept up to date, please feel free to email me. I'll make sure to add you to the list of people we keep in mind when we want to have these discussions. You can also sign up to the Center's mailing list at centerforinnovation.org, 4 with the number 4, not the word 4. And then, I think at least from our perspective, we will be trying to put together a short blog piece on what was discussed today, because we're an academic institution, so we have to make publicly available knowledge. So we will be making sure that this is shared, and we will be writing up with Johannes what we spoke about today and what the findings were. Johannes, if you want to maybe give a little bit of an idea of where you're going with the smart cities work.
For sure. So yeah, thanks a lot for everybody who participated today. I think like this, like we got very comprehensive and kind of like a bit even like another approach or overview of the challenges and the like the enablers for the solutions in smart city development. We created last year together with four different cities, including like the 4 Nordic cities, and then we were collaborating with city of Barcelona, which is like a forerunner of this smart city scheme. As you know, the vision for the global urban age called People First, and where we opened up a bit more this kind of like human-centric, people-first, regenerative city approach, which I very briefly discussed today. Now we are in a way that we are utilizing this vision and trying like kind of like implementing the ideas of those with working with different cities. City of Helsinki, but as well as a couple of cities in Germany, in UAE, and then in very different contexts. So these kind of like more practical or more like implementable ideas and solutions are very beneficial for that kind of work. And I will share you in the chat the link to this publication, and then I would like to ask you to maybe I don't know if you're able to get the email address, or if you want to share your contact details in the chat, so we could follow up with this work and then see like how we could collaborate and together with this team in the future as well. So I already got one email through the private chat. So be like Freya and share the email addresses. So we are able to do the follow-ups and then give the opportunities to contribute to the discussion and work with it.
You can either privately message if you'd rather be private, or whatever way you choose to send your information forwards. But we'll also just stick around here for a couple more minutes for any questions or last minute discussions or emails as well. But thank you so much for attending.